grievance studies, we submitted as James Lindsay, Helen Pluckrose, and I over 10 months, wrote around 250,000 words, 20 papers, and we submitted them to peer-reviewed journals to test the process, to whistleblow, if you will, to see if intentionally broken, absurd papers would get published. And 7 were published and accepted by the time the Wall Street Journal found out about it, and then we came clean, and 7 more were under review. And the idea there was to expose shoddy scholarship, corrupt scholarship, agenda-driven scholarship. But one of the things we realized from coming from the atheist movement was that social justice with an uppercase S and an uppercase J it really is a parasitic ideology, and it had woven its way, ironically enough, into the atheist movement and caused schisms and fractures within that movement. And so what we did was, the purpose of writing those was to test our own ideas. Maybe these folks are onto something that we haven't figured out. Maybe there really is something there. And the way to do that was to call penetration testing, to see if it works. So we wrote those papers, and then we now have our answer to that question.
Because, I mean, I've seen sort of strong criticisms of that. I think there was an editorial in the Times literary supplement, maybe, and some people saying that what you proved wasn't what you said that you've proved, and I'm sure there's other people who've questioned what you did. Have you had any dialogues with your book's about impossible conversations? Have you had any dialogues with your critics over this?
Dialogues, no. I mean, I've been brought up on trial, and I've been brought up 3 times, and I'm about to be brought up again for additional ethical violations and charges. And that conversation remains on the table. When we did the James Damore event with Helen Pluckrose and Heather Hying and I at PSU, we invited folks from the Women's Studies Department to come and have that dialogue. They didn't. We invited them 2 days later to come with Helen Pluckrose and James Lindsay and myself. They didn't come. Sorry. We invited them 2 days later, February 19th, with James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose and myself to come to that conversation. They didn't. When we did the Mythicist Milwaukee event, we tried to find someone from the Women's Studies departments or people who have published in this area specifically, or any adjacent areas in grievance studies. We couldn't find anybody to have a conversation with us. And that is on the table, that offer to have a conversation, not a debate, but a conversation. Although the Mythicist Milwaukee was a debate. But we can't find anybody who's willing to have a conversation with us. And one of the things we talk about in the book is, you can't force someone to have a conversation with you if they don't want to have a conversation. You can't, kidnap them and stick them at a table.
Because this, I think, is a really good place to start, because we're actually talking about a real-world example of either impossible conversations or those conversations not being had. And why do you think that no one wants to talk to you about this?
It could be that they view me as an inherently disagreeable fellow. It could be fear of losing an argument. It could be platforming, which is another idea that's very common. We don't want to give someone who has a different belief a platform. It could be, my strongest suspicion is that these folks don't know the other side of the argument, and so they've been indoctrinated. They don't value open discourse, dialogue, reason, Socratic interactions. They look at education as an ideology mill, and they're agenda driven. That's my strongest conjecture. I'm not positive of the percentage of the role, like in a pie chart, like how big of a cut of pie that would be, but I'm fairly confident it's a sizable cut of that pie.
So you're basically asking for someone to discuss with now. I hope someone does come out. That's basically what the Letter Wiki project is about, having those conversations and matching up people with opposing views. So I hope we'll call someone out now. I'll try and put some of the criticisms that someone might raise to you, but I think it would be much better if someone from that environment came forward.
Let me pause you right there and say, not just anybody, because people will say, well, you're punching down. Why haven't you had a conversation with someone who's published in these areas? So I'm happy to have a conversation with somebody who's specifically published in the journals in which we hoax might not be exactly the best word, but the person with whom I'm having that discussion, they can't be a random person. So they need to have some qualifications to be able to speak in the area, and that looks like ideally that they would replicate what we did. If you have a bunch of peer-reviewed publications in the journals in which we published, Hypatia would be a great one. Then Helen, Pluckrose, James Lindsay, and myself, my fellow co-authors, would be happy to have that conversation with you.
And I've seen you on Twitter talk about the fact that you find it quite peculiar or unusual that you've now got enemies. How's it been for you over the last kind of couple of years of having more increased prominence with the grievance studies thing and realising that a lot of people are not happy with that?
It is quite difficult in some ways. I mean, I can deal with people telling me I'm. On one side, they tend to tell me I'm a Nazi and a fascist. On the other side, they tend to point out I'm fat. So I can deal with those kind of random insults. But there are committed stalkers. And I have to block a lot of people. And then there is just this kind of collective of people who just really seem to put an awful lot of energy into misinterpreting everything I say, presenting it in the least charitable way, screenshotting things out of context. And it just really is quite disturbing to know that there are people who will put this much energy into attacking things that I don't mean and haven't said, and would actually be delighted if something terrible were to happen to me. That's quite an uncomfortable thought. Somebody came back to me when I said this on Twitter, and she said, you get what you give. You're a deeply unpleasant person. I thought that isn't really true. If I got what I give, what I would get is people telling me that my epistemology, my ways of knowing are wrong, and that my ethics are wrong. They would be polite, they would respond to what I actually said. I could deal with that. What I can't deal with is people. Today apparently I supported Nazis because I said that nearly everybody wants good things for society, and so that was taken off and run with, and it's just really difficult to it bothers me. I think the other two are better at ignoring than I am. I feel like if something is being presented wrongly, I have to put it right, and that's something I've got to stop doing.
There's one other thing I'd like to raise about, I see a lot of accusations of bad faith being lobbed around.
Yes,
and
grifter. Yeah,
grifter and bad faith. And also, I mean, I'm interested to unpack that. I also see the accusation of bad faith, it almost, from people in the centre and maybe the centre-right, and it almost seems the equivalent of the kind of no platforming coming from the left. Do you think, I mean, my sense is that if someone is genuinely arguing in bad faith, surely we can have a discussion and that will be exposed if that's the case.
I have no problem with, I know this is going to sound weird, but I have no problem with someone arguing in bad faith. That's not my problem. So you just said a lot. So let's unpack that. The first thing you said, well, my response to what you said was grifter. So that's a term I'm accused of grifting constantly. And when I first heard it, I was so baffled by it because I thought it was you receiving some kind of remuneration, financial money or something. And I was baffled by it because I did the grievance studies thing for no money. That New Atheism, I did an app, Atheos, for no money. All the stuff, I don't have a Patreon, I don't have a PayPal, I haven't taken a penny from anyone. I could not understand where this grifting accusation came from, and I keep thinking, well, geez, maybe I don't understand, and I was incorrect. I didn't understand it. I was correct that I didn't understand it. So grifting means, and correct me if you want to throw out another interpretation of this, it means that there's some idea in the zeitgeist that you have latched onto, not because you happen to believe it, but because you think it gives you social and maybe even intellectual currency to advance that idea. So the problem with that is, one, it assumes that people know your motivations. That only you can know your motivations. The other problem with that is it's a convenient excuse to not do intellectual work to engage their arguments. So someone has just said something, they've made an argument, grifter or Nazi, right? So we have a little label, a smear label, we place someone in a box, don't have to engage. It's an anti-dialectical tool that people use to avoid argument or engaging ideas at all. So that's the first thing. The second thing you said, what was the second thing again?
Was it the bad faith? Yeah, the arguments in bad faith.
Yeah. So,
or refusing to engage with people because you've already pre-decided that everything that they're saying is in bad faith, which I've seen on all sides of the aisle.
Yeah, I think, okay. So let's take a look at that. If refusing to engage with somebody because you believe that they're a bad faith actor is one thing, but engaging with someone you believe is acting in bad faith is another. So the problem, I see the more egregious problem by far of refusing to engage someone because you think they're acting in bad faith. In my experience, I have found that is because people are intellectually afraid. There's a kind of fear response. So that's why they don't want to engage, and they'll use anything as a convenient excuse to justify not engaging.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, with the examples that I'm thinking about. And I also wanted to ask as well, because you are quite heavily criticised on Twitter. I saw a few kind of backwards and forwards, and I know that Eric Weinstein and Sam Harris have talked about this quite a lot. That actually, again, especially Sam is obviously attacked quite a lot, and he feels that his sense making is getting worse and worse because he's finding it more and more difficult to distill the good quality criticism from the bad quality criticism. Do you worry about that? Do you think that might be happening to you as well?
I worry deeply, deeply about that. That is one of my primary concerns. One of my primary concerns is I've gotten so much rage and hatred that I've just tuned those people out. But yet I desperately need those people. I have to have those voices to that's the corrective mechanism in my head. That takes me out of delusion. But when everyone's telling me I'm a moron, a grifter, and a Nazi constantly, we all need that feedback to keep ourselves in check. And as much as I have tried to not invoke a defensive posture, I even find myself tone policing things, and I can't stand that about myself. But yet I really don't know what to do about that, because everybody, myself included, when you take strong stances about things, you absolutely need feedback from the other side. But when that feedback comes in terms of, as Nietzsche said, philosophizing with a hammer, when you're just getting hammered all the time, it's very difficult to sincerely reflect on to take those comments and sincerely reflect on those ideas. So I'm deeply concerned about that.